Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, coming to you as always from Studio 8H here in the CHEK News World Headquarters in Victoria. Another busy week, we say it every week in BC politics, but Premier David Eby's government dropping major pieces of legislation on housing. You've got the resignation of the Deputy Leader of the BC Greens, and we are going to break that all down with the pod squad. Jeff Ferrier, coming to us from Frame Point Public Affairs, Allie Blades from MASH Strategies. Jillian is off this week, but we are super happy to have joining us Khelsilem. You might recognize him as the chairperson of the Squamish Nation in his day job, but he's wearing his other hat here, which is one of the sharpest BC political commentators and organizers out there today. Thank you for being here, Khelsilem.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to dive right in, which is right into the housing pool, because every week there is more housing stuff happening. The BC government dropping two bills this week. The first changes the way municipalities can extract money from developers who want to build. They're called community amenity agreements right now. The government's changing them to something else. The second bill bans municipalities from rejecting condo towers around transit hubs. So they can go as high as 20 stories now near a SkyTrain terminal, 12 stories near a bus exchange in Metro Vancouver, 10 stories in a medium-sized city, 6 stories in the rest of the province. Municipalities can't say no to this, which is kind of a common theme in the housing legislation we have got over the last few weeks. Khelsilem, you're our guest. We'll go to you first. Significant changes, anything jump out at you here and what the Eby government's doing?
I would say it's one of the few examples that we're seeing in North America where there's kind of bold action for mass rezoning across the board, and the provincial-wide stuff and now sort of the sub-regional stuff is, I think, it is quite a substantial change. I think it has the potential to transform the province. But of course, there's an election coming soon, and as it is in politics, you either have to be doing the right thing or be seen doing the right thing. And there's not a lot of time to get a lot of housing built. So I think the Eby government is really trying to figure out how they can be seen as the pro-housing agenda in light of the rising costs of housing, inaccessibility to housing because of rents or prices. And so I think that they're really trying to set themselves up for the election in a year.
Do you hear any grumbling, Khelsilem, when you're sort of talking to other leaders in the province that, because it cuts both ways, right? You've got the government moving municipalities out of the way again this week with that legislation to move things faster, but then municipalities kind of being like, do we want to be moved out of the way? Do we still not kind of want to say on this, or are we happy letting the province be kind of the bad guy when it comes to not in my backyard protests? Do you hear that sort of debate going on?
I think that there's going to be a different kind of responses. There will be a lot of, I think, municipal leaders who are going to keep their head low and not really say much, because I think they're actually privately welcoming the changes. It takes a big burden off the chest of those governments to actually deliver on something in light of the usual community opposition. And then you're seeing other mayors and political leaders at the municipal level sort of complaining around some of the unintended consequences, whether it's access to revenue streams to pay for things like community centers and other amenities. But at the end of the day, we've been dealing with very significant housing shortage issues in, like, say, areas like Metro Vancouver. We have this very complicated and convoluted municipal governance structure at a sub-regional level, and they haven't been able to work together to deliver the amount of housing that's needed. And so now you have the province finally stepping in. We're seeing this happen around the world in jurisdictions in North America, so it's not totally unprecedented. It's just finally happening here. But I think that there will be a lot of municipal leaders that are quietly and privately welcoming this, because it'll deliver on something that they can't necessarily deliver on themselves.
Yeah, no, I agree, Jeff. And we talked about this last week too, where it's kind of like frees municipalities and political leaders up from that kind of slate opposition and the not in my backyard stuff. And they can just point to the NDP and say, go find your nearest NDP MLA if you want to complain about Project X. We're not able to do anything about it in some way. So what do you make of this legislation?
So, on that point of the local governments, I think it's actually a missed opportunity for a lot of local governments to have taken on that battle and be the pro-housing people in their own local communities. Yes, these kinds of conflicts with NIMBYs can be difficult and annoying, but in the environment that we're in now, where housing is so unaffordable and out of reach for so many, being seen as leaders who are standing up for more housing for people would be politically helpful. And so I think that's the calculation that the province has made here, to its credit. You can say a lot of things about the NDP and housing and the timing and outcomes, but one thing you can't say now about David Eby is that he's sitting on his laurels doing nothing. He's certainly living up to his man of action moniker on this one. Some real substantive, meaningful action. So multiplexes, clamping down on NIMBYs at councils, denser housing near transit, which is a game changer, tens of thousands of new homes every year if they get this right. And, I think that's a political dynamic that that Eby and his government are happy to bring into the next election and to campaign on in the next election. They're feeling pretty good about this week. And we'll see how this all rolls out.
Yeah, to be seen to be moving so quickly on housing, whether or not any of this works fast enough to actually create more housing by the next election might be just what the NDP needs to carry it through. Allie, what jumps out at you?
Well, that's exactly it. And both Khelsilem and Jeff mentioned this. We're a year out. There are some political opportunity and risks in going so aggressive on housing. One of the things that I want to point out, though, is those unintended consequences. And I am not the policy expert on any of this, but there was a fascinating article that quoted Paul Sullivan, who is an expert in this space. And he talked about the air tax. He talked about property taxes going up. And these are... It's one of those things where it's just like you're trying to deal with the bigger problem, the bigger, the triage of all of things, the bigger bleed in what we're dealing with in this province. But we're not necessarily so focused on those little things that will come up a year from now, perhaps conveniently after the next election. There was this really, really good quote that I have to share, though. It was by Andy Yang, who's the director of the city program from SFU. And he said that he called it surgery by chainsaw versus a scalpel. And it was exactly it. I mean, this is exactly what's happening, is like they are fixing the problem, but not very delicately and in those precise points of those taxes that will go up, and the air tax as well. It's interesting, though, because we talk about the provincial election coming up, and we're talking about the focus that the NDP have had. They've been very aggressive. They're doing all of the right things. No one's saying that transit-oriented housing isn't a bad thing. It opens up so many opportunities, specifically for seniors and students. But you also have to think about the other side here. Well, then what is the opposition doing about it? And it's a missed opportunity for the leader of the BC United, Kevin Falcon, because if we think about this in the improv comedy terms of the yes and tactic, you need to do the no and. I'm going to oppose it, but here's what I'm going to offer instead. And so far, we haven't really seen that. We've seen a lot of opposition to the housing policy, but what's the and? What's your no and? Hopefully that comes soon, because it's if the NDP are using this as one of the top issues in the question period, we hear it over and over and over again, housing, housing, housing. Well, then you have to have an answer as to what you're going to do about it. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, it seems that for the BC United, their biggest thing that they continue to bring up is crime and safety. So they're on very different tracks here.
Yeah. Well, we're going to bring that together into a larger discussion about sort of the context of this immense amount of change and how political parties respond to that on the audio portion of the podcast. So make sure you subscribe to that. Another big political development this week, the deputy leader of the BC Greens was fired/resigned after it was discovered he had liked a post on social media comparing Dr. Bonnie Henry to Nazi war criminal Dr. Joseph Mengele, who was responsible for horrific medical experiments on Jewish prisoners in the Second World War. This was a surprise, it appears, to the BC Green leader, Sonia Furstenau, and the party, not a surprise to everyone else in BC politics who was paying attention. But what do we make of how this happened, the Green response, and the questions that follow about what this means for the kind of party's status here? Jeff?
So, this scandal is a great big Green mess. I'll start by commending Sonia Furstenau for firing this fellow as deputy leader and as a candidate. But the warning signs have been there since day one. She'd never been in the spot to begin with. We've talked about it on this show. If you click on the Google and the guy's name, you get immediately stories of BC kids being airlifted to Alberta for care because he couldn't get along with another doctor in his former job. So lots of red flags and warnings. You'd also see all sorts of COVID conspiratorial thinking, and the Greens still recruit him because they see a constituency of COVID zero folks out there who are pretty upset and active, and so they went after them, and now they're facing the consequences of that decision. It's embarrassing for the Greens. I think BC benefits from having a strong party with a effective environmental and climate focus. I think it's a party that we need in times like these, but stuff like this undercuts having that kind of party. And just a couple of quick notes. This guy said his explanation for the tweet was, it was an accident. I didn't mean to like the tweet. He may as well have said that his dog got hold of his phone and liked the tweet. It's not credible. No one believes him, and it's indicative of the judgment and character issues that have been the issue with this person from day one. And while I commend Furstenau for taking the right action and moving him out, blaming staff for failing to properly vet Gandhi instead of taking responsibility as a leader for signing off on his recruitment and appointment is buck passing, and it's something that I expect from a leader who has in a lot of other aspects of her work has been really strong and good.
Mm-hmm. Oh, those are great points. And I mean, even if you put the Nazi post aside as a mistake, it doesn't take long to scroll through the social media feed to find liking of posts calling Health Minister Adrian Dix a charlatan eugenicist, and liking of
no
posts
apologies for that yet.
No, and posts saying that the NDP doesn't care if people live or die. So I don't think it was one thing. I think it was months of social media activity. Khelsilem, what did you make of all this?
It definitely was an embarrassment for the BC Greens. I think especially in the context of election being a year out and the Greens really trying to establish themselves as a viable option. There were a number of ridings in the last election where they placed second. And there's some ridings like the West Vancouver Sea to Sky where they lost by a few hundred votes. And so I think they're really trying to establish themselves as a viable option, especially for dissatisfied BC NDP voters or even dissatisfied BC United voters. But when they sort of walk themselves into controversies like this, they're not doing themselves any favors, and they really need to establish themselves with legitimate candidates who are going to drive, those mainstream voters towards their party. And I think this doesn't help them in that sense. But it is picking up on, the particular kind of conspiratorial aspect that's out there in politics. We see it a lot online and kind of increasing in some ways. But it becomes really problematic when it kind of manifests in this way and really is a part of politics that doesn't really need to be there, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've called it the fringe in the past, and a lot of parties are flirting with the fringe, and we see it even federally sometimes. But it's unclear if that is actually the path to electoral success. I don't think it is appealing to the fringe, but that's what some parties are doing. Allie, what did you take away from all this?
I want to elaborate on some things that Jeff was saying earlier of just, it's the buck stops with the leader, and there's a lot to unpack there. But the point I want to drive home is that we've seen other leaders rein in their candidates and caucus in a very successful way. And I think this is a failure on Sonia Furstenau, actually, that there was no memo that said, keep your mouth shut on this. And that's simply all that needed to be done. And so you can't pass blame for something that is ultimately your job as leader. When you want the title, you then have to take the responsibility. It's just one of those things that come with the role. I will say this, though, other than us talking about it right now, I don't know if this is going to be a big issue in closer to the election. Hopefully they kind of bury it and then no one actually remembers it a year out from now, because he was just a candidate. Mind you, he was the deputy leader, but just a candidate. So they have the potential in the lead up to October of next year to make good on this, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my take on it, and it's been a while coming for the Greens, but I think it undermines the moral high ground that they like to pretend that they have in BC politics, that they're not doing politics like anyone else. They're just doing evidence-based, critiques of policy, when in fact you've got the second highest ranking person in the party doing the worst of politics, just like everyone else, and that party's hands are just as dirty as everyone else's when it comes to politics. So I think it's a lesson for other Greens who are online right now doing exactly the same thing and thinking that they're appealing to some sort of burgeoning Green base, when in fact you can't justify away nonsense, venomous personal attacks as some kind of the cognitive dissonance required to look down on politics and lecture other parties about doing things better and differently, and then allow this to happen is ridiculous. I think that's my take on that. But anyways, can
I just jump in and say say that there's a lot of folks out there who are saying this is all Rob Shaw's fault. It's all his fault.
Yeah.
It's whose fault it is? It's the fault of a fellow who went on Twitter and decided he was going to like a really, really awful tweet and sentiment and a whole host of others that we're not even talking about here. And it's about this is the result of the actions that person took, and this is coming home. He's got to face that responsibility. And shining a light on these things is exactly the job of journalists. And that's exactly what you did. And so people should stop whining about how you pointed out that this person did this thing that has cost him his job, and rightly so.
Yeah. And I think we can also say, to an earlier point, and Allie will bring you back in on this in a sec, but I think we can also say that Adam Olsen, great MLA, does a great job on the floor of the House. I continually point out he is saying things and raising issues and doing things in a way that no one else is doing in the legislature. Sonia Furstenau has made some big changes too. The MLAs of the Greens are a value add to our system. They're very good. They're needed, as Jeff said. But then in trying to find their future, they end up a little bit in a crowded political arena where everyone's fighting for the center. They're kind of a little bit off and maybe heading in the wrong direction there. Allie, you wanted to jump in?
No, that was me saying preach to
preach.
Jeff. That wasn't me adding anything else to it. Okay. That was a mic drop.
All right, okay. Khelsilem, anything else come to mind after that round?
It's definitely growing pains for a burgeoning Green Party, and they have a long way to go, and we'll see what the next year looks like for them, and maybe they'll pick up some seats, but they definitely need to be more disciplined.
On the other side of the Dr. Henry debate, are the BC Conservatives, who on the floor of the House this week called for her to be fired and held a rally outside the legislature saying healthcare workers who lost their jobs due to being unvaccinated should be allowed back to work. That issue, I guess, is different from the Dr. Henry issue with the Greens. We are the only province in Canada that still requires healthcare workers to be vaccinated to have their job. But we have not seen anyone on the floor of the House call for Dr. Henry's resignation quite like that. So, Allie, what do we make of that?
I always wonder when the vaccination requirement for healthcare worker conversation comes up in BC politics, and how the BC Conservatives are the ones driving it. They're currently the only ones driving it out of all of the political parties. If it was anybody else delivering the message, how it would be received. And let me unpack this here, in that we sometimes think that the BC Conservatives are kind of the wacky ones of the groups. Let's just call it for what it is, right? You see a lot of eye rolls behind Bruce Banman when he's speaking, and a lot of dismissive behavior when John Rustad is speaking. Even so, something I even noticed this week with the speaker just pushing him to get to the question. Meanwhile, others had long minutes to do their preamble, and so it's just something I've observed. Anyways, let me get to the point here. I always wonder if it was somebody else who came to this in the ledge, if it would be differently received, because what they're doing is that they're fighting essentially for rural health care and ensuring that we have doctors and nurses in places where if there's one doctor who has decided not to get their vaccine, it's a big hit to the community. And these aren't my words. I mean, the BC Nurses Union put out statement after statement saying the disproportionate amount of unvaccinated nurses across the province and the impacts to local hospitals that takes. And so my point here is that John and Bruce Banman are not saying this just because they are the only two people in the province that believe what they're saying and let's hire back these healthcare workers. They're doing it for a certain community, and it's a large one at that. But it's unfortunate that because it's them and we kind of think that they're crazy sometimes, that it's not seen as a serious conversation.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a fair point. We only have 1 minute left. Khelsilem, close us off on this. Jeff, we'll come back to you in the podcast.
BC United are riding or BC Conservatives are riding a high in the polls right now, and I think they're trying to find their footing. They have an opportunity to definitely, ride that wave going into the next provincial election, and I think they're looking for places to garner a base of support and a place to fundraise from, a constituency that sees them as the champions of that community. They are a bit fringe at times. When the leader of the party makes very offensive comparisons to residential schools and SOGI education, like on National Truth and Reconciliation Day, you have examples like that, where other examples where they're kind of taking outlandish stances. I think they're really trying to find that place where they can be a legitimate party, and they have a year to try and do that, because if they ride that high, they could be gaining a lot of seats in the legislature, which I think they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they sort of have a 50% batting average of kind of stuff that's out there, like let's ban books, and then stuff like this where there's probably some type of debate that should be happening on vaccinated healthcare workers at this point in time. But not everything they do is lands the mark, but that's politics. And make sure you subscribe for all the latest, and we'll be back next week here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.